Yakuza finger removal, also known as yubitsume. It's a ritual done to gain forgiveness after a member committed an offense to someone else in his group, and it consists of amputating portions of one's own little finger to show sincere apology and remorse to the other. I've put this one as the least painful because it doesn't usually cause lifelong lasting pain and it isn't deadly, unlike the brutal ones further down the list. Bastinado consists of beating the victim with a light rod-knotted cord or lash exclusively on the feet. Unlike most types of flogging, it is meant more to be painful than to cause actual injury. Even though if done too harshly or for too long, it might cause the victim to not be able to walk anymore. This one is also not deadly. Pitch capping. Pitch capping involves pouring hot pitch or tar into a conical paper cap and forcing it onto the victim's head. The pitch was allowed to cool and the cap was ripped off, removing skin and tissue from the victim's scalp, scarring him for life. It wasn't usually done with the intention of killing, but deadly infections. After this weren't that common, elephant's foot, this punishment, also known as gungar, was mostly used in Asia, specifically India, and it consisted of killing the victim by crushing him with an elephant. There were two variations of this. If the victim was lucky, his head would be placed on a pedestal and the elephant would crush it, instantly killing him. This wasn't that painful because the victim would die instantly, but the second variation wasn't as forgiving. Some royal members wanted to sit down and enjoy a long show, so they ordered the elephant riders to train the elephants to walk over non-vital parts first, such as the legs and arms. The person would get crushed over and over before the elephant actually walked over his head and killed him. Po'auli in ancient Rome, those who would kill their own father were subjected to po'ali. It was a death penalty that consisted of being sewn up in a leather sack with a mix of live animals, including a dog, snake, monkey, and a chicken, and then being thrown into water. Roman decimation in ancient Rome, when military units or a large group were guilty of capital offenses, such as cowardice, mutiny, or desertion. They went through the process of decimation. A cohort of roughly 480 soldiers that needed to be punished was divided into groups of 10, and each group drew lots randomly. The soldier who picked the shortest straw had to be killed by his 9 friends, often by stoning, clubbing, or stabbing, while the 9 surviving ones had to stay outside the fortified security of the camp for some time, since the killed victim was chosen randomly. All soldiers in the group were potentially liable for execution, regardless of how guilty they were. Blowing from a gun. Blowing from a gun is a method of execution in which the victim is typically tied to the mouth of a cannon, which is then fired, resulting in instant death. A description of what happens was given by an English soldier in the 19th century, and he said that the victim's head goes straight up into the air for about 40 or 50 feet. The arms fly off right and left high up in the air and fall at around 100-yard distance, while the legs drop to the ground beneath the muzzle of the gun. It's this low on the list because the victim probably doesn't feel a thing, as his death is instant. Basil the Sow's blind journey. Emperor Basil II reportedly captured 15,000 Bulgarians during the Battle of Sidon, so he decided to use them as a message to their homeland. He divided the prisoners into groups of 100, and then he had 99 out of every 100 blinded, with the 100th man being blinded in only one eye, so that he could still lead the other 99 back home. Bulgarian Tsar Samuel died of a heart attack on October 6, 1014, reportedly due to seeing his soldiers blinded. Castor oil poop barrels. Making someone drink a lot of sea oil caused stomach pain and made them so sick that they could no longer hold their poop together. They would then put the person in a big human-sized barrel and remove them. When the person confessed, this could even go as far as leaving the person to drown in their own body fluids inside the barrel. If he didn't cooperate, uriment was used both as an execution method and as a lifelong imprisonment method. It consisted of putting someone in an enclosed space, in really tight space, such as behind a wall, for the rest of his life. If it was used as an execution method, the person would be left to starve to death, while If it was used as imprisonment, they would regularly give the victim food rack. The person would be forced to lay on a rectangle-shaped wooden rack that stretched the victim's body. By pulling the arms and legs in opposite directions, it caused incredible pain and could lead to dislocated limbs and torn ligaments. It was mainly used as a method to get information, but it could also be used to tear the victim's limbs out and leave him bleeding to death. Tarring and feathering. Tarring and feathering is a form of public torture where a victim is stripped naked or stripped to the waist, while wood tar, sometimes hot, is either poured or painted onto the person. After that, the victim would have feathers thrown onto him, or he was rolled around on a pile of feathers so that they stuck to the tar. This would not only cause extreme burns to the victim's skin, permanently scarring him, but also psychologically humiliate him in public, as he was meant to look like a giant chicken walking around the street choke pear. It was a metal tool that was put into someone's mouth or booty hole, and then made bigger on purpose. The tool would stretch the tissue to the point of no return. Aztec live heart removal. When the Aztecs sacrificed people to Hosel the sun, God the victim would be placed on a sacrificial stone, and the priest would then cut through the abdomen with an obsidian or flint blade. The heart would be torn out, still beating, and held towards the sky in honor of the sun. God Heretic's fork. It's a collar with two sets of metal forks at each end. One set was placed under the chin and the other at the sternum, and the device was secured around the neck. This forced the victim to keep their head raised, leading to severe discomfort and sleep deprivation. The person would be asked questions or just be left there while the fork slowly pierced through their neck and jaw, and this lasted until the victim could no longer hold their head raised, causing the fork to pierce through rat's cup. A method attributed to the Roman Emperor Nero involved tying a cup filled with hungry rats to the victim's stomach and then applying heat to the bottom, forcing the rats to burrow through the victim's body to escape. In some parts of South America, they used a variation of this method called the rectoscope, which consisted of inserting living rats into a victim's rectum through a tube, forcing them to make their way through the victim's body to get out Catherine's wheel. An execution method, where the victim's limbs were tied to a large wheel and then struck with a hammer or iron bar, breaking their bones in multiple places. The wheel was placed on display later on, often leaving the victim to starve, boiling alive. The victim would be lowered into a large container with a boiling liquid such as oil, gradually and slowly. The first exposed parts would be the extremities such as fingers and toes, which have lots of nerve endings and cause incredible pain. Then the skin muscles and fat softened and liquefied due to the heat, while internal organs and the flesh got boiled from the outside, making this a slow and agonizing process. In another variation, which is thought to be even more painful and long, the victim would be lowered into a normal temperature liquid, which would be gradually heated until it started boiling. Keel hauling. Keel hauling was a severe maritime punishment where a sailor was tied to a rope and dragged underwater from one side of the ship to the other, passing under the ship's keel. If the person did not drown or get vital damage from the rusty and sharp wooden body of the ship itself, they would just do it again until the person was no longer alive. It was feared for its brutality. Sawing, when used as an execution method, the victim would be hanged upside down to make the blood flow to the head, increasing the time the person was conscious. The executioner would then divide the victim vertically into two halves, starting from the groin and moving upwards, hanged, drawn, and quartered. This method was used to execute men convicted of high treason in medieval and early modern Britain in Ireland, and it consisted of multiple steps. The convicted traitor was tied to a wooden board and dragged behind a horse to the execution site. There he was almost hanged to death, then mutilated and had his organs removed before being beheaded and his body divided into 4 parts, just in case he was still alive. These remains were often displayed in well-known places across the country like London Bridge to warn others about the consequences of being a traitor glass straw. This method wasn't always deadly, But in my opinion, it deserves this spot because of how brutally painful it sounds. It's the method of inserting a glass rod into a man's air willy and then smashing it with a hammer, causing the glass rod to fragment into multiple small pieces that shattered all over the inside's bamboo through booty hole. A bamboo would be put inside a person's booty hole and it would be left there. The bamboo would grow really quickly inside the man, causing incredible pain. It was sometimes left until it exited from the other side's Spanish donkey. This was a sharp, angled wooden device on which the victim was forced to sit, straddling it like a donkey with weights attached to their feet. This would increase pressure and pain on the body, often causing severe injury to the legs and spine until the victim was ripped apart by their body weight. Brazen bull, a metal statue shaped like a real-sized bull, was used to lock someone inside and then heated up with fire. Underneath, the person inside would feel extreme heat and pain while being burned alive. And it was meant to scare others by showing how bad the punishment could be. There were special pipes to make the victim breathe, which also made the screams hearable for the crowd, resulting in a bull-like sound. The steam would leave from the bull's nose for extra realism impalement. The brutal part of impaling like cruxation is that the victim tortured himself. In a famous variant, he was set up high on a stake so that it didn't actually penetrate anything vital, so long as he stayed up on his toes, so he could keep it from going any deeper, so long as he kept his own weight on his feet. When the victim would get tired, he would slip a little further, and when he felt the pain, he would scramble up again on the already aching and exhausted muscles, only to repeat this process out of exhaustion a little later, and so on until something vital got pierced. Another variant consisted of the Judas chair, a torture device featuring a pyramid-shaped seat where the victim was placed at the top, with ropes used to lower and suspend their body weight onto the sharp apex. The chair would slowly rip the person apart. Flaying was a gruesome method where the skin was removed from the body while the victim was still alive. This extreme form of torture was used to cause intense, slow pain and suffering, eventually leading to death through shock or infection. The skin lacking major blood vessels did not cause rapid blood loss, so victims could remain conscious and endure prolonged agony. It was often considered a meticulous process, requiring precision and skill from the executioner, and rather than removing the skin in pieces, cultures sought methods to flay the victim more efficiently and completely, sometimes using substances like boiling water to facilitate the process. Blood eagle. This one was a brutal ritual where the victim's ribs were cut from the spine and spread out to resemble wings, while the lungs were pulled through the openings, causing a slow, agonizing death. It's short, but it's one of the most brutal ones. In my opinion, Lingi, also known as death by 1,000 cuts. It was a famous method used in China to prolong the suffering for as long as possible. There were multiple variations of this method, even though almost all of them included cutting the skin deep enough to cause incredible pain, but not deep enough to allow the victim to lose blood. In one variation, the victim was restrained and an executioner would pull knives out at random, each with a body part on it: left forearm, right thigh, left foot, neck, etc. Each time he'd pull a knife out, he would make a cut on that body part. This would continue until the executioner pulled out the knife with the heart on it, and that's when he stabbed the victim through the heart. In another variation, they would tie a fishnet tightly around someone's body and cut off the pieces of skin that popped up in the holes of the net. In the most brutal version, they would bury someone up to their neck, make a cross-shaped cut at the crown of the head, peel the skin back, and pour mercury in the wound. The mercury, through its weight, would separate skin from flesh, and as the person struggled to unbury themselves, they would eventually leave their skin behind in the whole scaff ISM. This one is considered by many to be the worst execution method in this punishment. The condemned person was placed inside a boat or between two boats lying on their back, with their arms and legs protruding through holes. They were force-fed large amounts of milk and honey, which induced severe diarrhea, and their entire body was smeared with the same mixture. This made them attractive to rodents, bugs, wasps, bees, flies, and whatever other animals lived near the lake, they would eat and bite at the victim's flesh. And when the next morning arrived, the boat would be brought back to the coast, and they would force feed him another gigantic meal of milk and honey, also placing it on him once more. This was done on a daily basis to prolong the punishment for as long as possible. It was reported that the rats would usually try to go into the person's booty hole, and that the method was so long that it seemed to have no end, with a person surviving 17 days. This person reportedly had his entire face completely covered with wasp, and his flesh was rotting away, filled with swarms of parasites and worms, all while being covered in his own filth. If you want to discuss this video or suggest an idea for the next one, join my Discord link in the description.